Welcome to Steven Frain Sister. This is podcast episode 13. I'm Pamella Jean with
Samantha Bennington.
And today's topic is why suicide is not selfish. And I know this is a hard topic for a lot of people. An article that I read by Stephanie Chandler that I found through Survivors of Suicide Loss, the organization that we interviewed one of the advisors from over there on a previous podcast. They put up this article about how the reasons why suicide is not selfish, and I thought it was very important for us to talk about it because a lot of people think it is, and these are some of the reasons why the professionals do not think that it is. And just, I think also understanding why someone would leave people they love, children they love, just understanding that and understanding what goes through somebody who is dealing with mental issues that are beyond the tools that they can deal with. And this is a desperate act, and to have a little bit more empathy for that, and just to understand it. So I will put a link to this article underneath. But one of the things that I think is very interesting that it says is we need to stop using the term committed suicide, and we've talked about that. Our loved ones died by suicide and from depression. They didn't understand the devastation they would leave behind. They didn't mean to inflict so much pain on us.
I believe they didn't mean to hurt us.
But they did.
And the aftermath is messy. Very, very messy. On levels of every level that's a part of your life, your daily life. So it's a tough one. I know when we first discussed that we were going to do this podcast, I go, it's not selfish. When this first happened to me, and I'm not sure if I brought this up in a previous podcast, when this affected my life, not happened to me, let's rephrase that. Abraham Hicks did a podcast, and I believe
I'm familiar with this. Mm-hmm.
That it's called Croaking.
Yes.
And it was her perspective on it was that it was very brave and courageous. So when we brought discussing this up, I even asked, why is it not selfish? Because there's moments that I've thought it. That, wow, here we all are. You didn't want to be here because you were unhappy in your life. So whoever you may be, I'm not talking about anyone in particular, not pointing fingers about anything, but I have thought, going through it as a survivor, as well, why did you get to choose this and we're here cleaning up the mess?
Yeah. Well, I was told when my brother passed that it was a selfish act. I was told that. I remember as a teenager. You know what I mean? And so it's become a stigma.
But
and
do you feel it selfish at all?
For him, I don't, because I think also now I'm much older and I've been through my own trials and tribulations, and he felt like a burden. He felt like a burden on my parents. He was ashamed. He was homeless at the time. He didn't even want my parents to know that he was homeless. He was very ashamed of that. My parents were very, Ivy League educated, and he wasn't going to be that. And I just felt like there was a lot of pressure on him. And he told my mother just before he did it. He told her he was going to do it. And he did.
And she didn't take that seriously or believe
I don't
him,
know if she did or she didn't. She came and actually found me, which was interesting. She came and picked me up from school. I was walking home from school, and she got me. So, but I think, I don't feel that, because one of the things is, and what I like about this article is it talks about a suicide trance. And for me, just reading this article, I was like, oh, that's what it is. It's like this loop. And it's also that happens when you're feeling down about yourself. You know, when you have a bad experience with somebody, you know how you can't get that experience out of your head and you're like, oh God, I wish it didn't happen like that. And you want to go back in time, but sometimes you re-loop it and re-loop it and re-loop it. That's what this suicide trance is. And
what does that mean? So the suicide trance means you're re-looping that it happened, or that you're that unhappy?
Well, let me read a little bit of this article. It says, from the writer's perspective, I used to view suicide as selfish before I lost my husband to depression in 2013, and then set out to better understand what had happened. Learning that the brain gets stuck in a loop of the suicidal trance helped me make sense of it all. My husband was the least selfish person I've ever known. He would have never wanted to inflict such pain on his family, especially on our then 7-year-old son, whom he adored. Depression is an illness that lies to its victims. When in the suicide trance, they feel worthless and hopeless. They experience a level of pain the rest of us cannot begin to fathom. Pain that has been compared to feeling like surgery without anesthesia.
Wow.
And when I read that, I mean, there were moments in my own life that I was so low, I could not sleep because of the pain. I had pains in my arms that I just never had before in my own life. And I could see, and I wasn't this low, but I could see, what am I going to do to stop the pain? And especially as a person that doesn't drink at all, like a little bit here and there. You know, I'm not a recovering alcoholic or anything. I just can't handle my liquor. I've never done a drug in my life, not even pot. You know what I mean? It's like, how do you get out of that pain? And that a lot of times people get out of the pain, they go do heroin, or they drink a lot, or they do all those kinds of things. But I think what happens too when you're in this trance, and it talks a little bit more further in this article, is that you don't want to do that again. You don't want to get low again. You don't want to, you know what I mean? You get in that loop. And that's what that suicide trance is believing. I like how it says here, depression is an illness that lies to its victims. Because it does lie. It says that you're that worthless human being that is not worthy of your kids, of your family. And you're not getting outside of yourself, understanding that what you're about to do is going to bring so much mess and so much pain to your family. You can't see anything but the pain. You can't feel anything beyond the pain.
So, you know, everybody is at a different place in time with their coping skills and surviving. For me, I'm still struggling with the selfish part.
Right.
Because the way everything has been handled, chosen or not, right? It's been messy. Real messy. And so that's hard. But what helped me is more of the thinking they're courageous and brave, and it's on that spiritual level of they're not vibrating on the frequency here in this lifetime of theirs, and so therefore they have to evolve to the next place, and so that therefore they're courageous. I found that to be more helpful for me than this, but I wonder if it becomes more of the time frame of the healing process. In my healing process, I don't know if it's just that's a time factor to push through those emotions.
Well, I think what it's saying is that they're not in the right mindset.
But for people who are survivors that have not been in that mindset, it's very hard
to understand
it. So as much as we're talking about, which that's going to help me understand it, and the more we read and research, and I still don't feel the same, though.
Right. I get what you're saying.
And I think there's going to be a lot of listeners out there who are on their own journey of different, but God, knowledge is power, huh?
Knowledge is power.
You can make better decisions when you know about something. You will know what works for your healing process and what doesn't by how it feels. But the more you learn and the more you know, I'm glad I'm reading this and able to see this, because it gave me a different perspective. Before I had courage that I went to first, actually, which I don't know, that's because love comes first, right? So I went there first, but then I also go to that, well, this is pretty selfish. Like, wow.
Well, yeah, because I think they don't see the aftermath. And I think what's important about us talking about the aftermath is that mostly anybody who's interested in this podcast, most people have been affected by suicide. So contagion, as we've talked about previously, is a real thing. So you need to understand that if you're starting to go down this path, your family will miss you. The pain, no matter what pain you're feeling, your family will feel it tenfold if you're gone.
What's interesting is we can have a family member or loved one that we know is terminally ill. And the pain that someone experiences with the loss of a loved one, but yet they even had the opportunity to help plan or get to spend as much quality time as possible and make each second really matter and count.
Yeah.
And we're so sad with that. What makes me feel like somebody who is that mentally ill and depressed, this is what makes sense, is they're just so disconnected that they're not connected to anybody. They feel so alone. There's not one link of humanity.
Well, yeah, and they're in so much pain. I mean, in the article it says she interviews a person, says a suicide attempt survivor told me it was like my brain was on fire. All I wanted to do was stop the pain. I wasn't thinking about how it would devastate my family. At the time, I thought it was a burden on them and that they would be better off without me.
Which we've heard time and time again.
Yeah, that's very common. So that's the lie. That's the suicide trance. That's the lie that depression is telling you.
I recently got called from somebody who was really having a hard time, really thought the same thing. But thank God he was expressive enough.
Men just don't talk about it. I mean, men don't talk about it, and they don't want to talk about it with their friends and their family, and it's hard, and it's like, I think us talking about it more and maybe us finding more men to interview is really good, because I know that there are men that listen to our podcast, and we could be the only outlet that they have.
Right.
Men have, the connections that they have with their friends are not kind of the connections that you have with their girlfriends. I think girlfriends have a lot more outlets to talk about their feelings, and they're just not given the same kind of tools.
I have this wonderful book, Why Am I Still Depressed, by Jim Phelps. If you can't find a really good way to talk about something, or for instance, my son and I, we have a lot of family that live in different states, and so when things like this come to my attention, I like to order the copies of the books and send them as gifts. I think as you start reading it a bit, you want to see what applies to even your own personality. It's and it's just very interesting about the human psyche and where to go, and that's where I would just want to have so many tools out there.
Yeah, no, definitely.
So back to this article that really...
Well, and there's a few other ones too that I've come across, and I think that they have different perspectives too. And so there's this other article that has... that she talks about, I believe there are two possible reasons why some say suicide is a selfish act. The first may be an attempt. I think this is an interesting perspective. The first may be an attempt to comfort the suicide loss survivors in an effort to help shift the guilt, burden, blame to the one who died. The second reason may be that it's easier for them to say suicide is a selfish act rather than really try to process why someone would take their own life. Being a suicide loss survivor gives one much more perspective. I hope to use this perspective to educate others. Hearing those words today was a good thing, as it would strengthen my resolve to continue to inspire conversations about mental illness and suicide with the hopes of dispelling myths like suicide is selfish. So I think that's an interesting perspective of people at first, and maybe that's why for me, when I was younger, they were trying to say, oh, it was a selfish act. So as a child or, a young girl, I would not feel
guilty or
being blamed for his death. So I think that is a really interesting thing. But I think the reason that you can feel that it is selfish is because how much pain you feel afterwards. I mean, it's just a really weird kind of grief.
Right.
It's like, why did you do this to me? Why'd you leave me here? Why did you leave all this tragedy and aftermath? But I understand that they're not thinking that way.
You know what frustrates me the most, though, is that we all have choices. And it's something, God, that I used to love having, our Stephology conversations with Uncle Steph, and literally talk about people's choices and get very philosophical. And I have a hard time not understanding, like, how could you do this? And not think as an adult that there's going to be consequences. Oh, except for you're just making the ultimate choice now, and you're gone. We are the ones. So I struggle with this one because I didn't make that choice. I'm responsible for the choices of the people that I engage in life with. So then when you have somebody that has been in your life for a very, very long time and then goes and makes other choices in their life, and you're not in those choices. Now I'm going my way in life. And now, because of the choices that we made previously to be a family, and then we made choices to get a divorce and separate, then this person went and made choices with his life, but we're stuck cleaning
They made a choice that affects you detrimentally. That's the thing. That's what's hard about it. That's why.
Well, that's what makes you angry.
That's what makes you angry. That's the thing, is that you are angry about it. You know what I mean? You are angry about it. You do have rage about it. I know I have rage about it. I've had to work on my rage.
I don't have mental health issues, so I can clearly see there was like so many options of choices, and I already knew what some of them were that were going to change the situation. That's it. We all have choices, and we constantly are given opportunities to continuously choose those choices to pull us out of it.
Right. So I think that the more we can talk about this suicide trance, so to speak, to people that are survivors or people that they know are struggling, by saying, look, if you know, because one of the things I get, and this has happened to me several times, people have called me now and said, Pamela, I know so-and-so is struggling, but I just don't want to talk to them about it because, or I'm going to tell you, but don't tell them I told you. Maybe you can call them, or maybe, you know what I mean? And it's like, that's happened to me several times now. And my response is always like, no, you need to talk about this. You need to tell them that you're going to tell somebody. You need to address this head on. I understand that they don't want to talk about it. That's the dangerous part. If they ask you to keep it quiet, you need to be like, no, I'm not going to keep this quiet. Yeah. Who else can we talk to? What else can we do? Because you're scaring me. I'm worried I'm going to lose my friend. I mean, that's
and then
the type
enforce,
of thing.
This will pass. This too shall pass. Yeah. And I love you, and I'm here for you, and we're friends.
Be afraid
and
to address it.
And definitely, you can always back it up with how much you care and you love them. But letting them know like, I'm not the professional that you're in need of, but I'm right here with you.
Right.
Not gonna let you down.